pretty sure I'm the wrong person to interview for this.
No, I want your authentic answers.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So I didn't learn much about the nuclear industry, through my classes in school. It wasn't really part of the narrative. It really wasn't part of the educational curriculum that was presented. I think I remember in my New Mexico history class, I think talk a little bit about the Manhattan Project and how New Mexico was directly involved in that, and it was definitely framed as kind of we played this really important role in ending the Second World War, and that was the narrative that was presented. But
mostly the raw history behind it, at least in the context of history, just why we had to make the bomb, and it was to prevent the loss of several millions more lives. And in the context of science, we learned that how much of a achievement it was to actually construct the bomb, and how it was like this kind of pinnacle of mankind.
Like a majority of my New Mexico history class was like centered around World War II. But what's weird about our New Mexico history class is there's only a semester.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that's how everybody else's was, but ours was only 16 weeks, and then that was it. So like a lot of it, like I said, was mainly like a little bit before like the Conquistador era, and then World War II, and then like I think probably like a week of like current day.
We didn't learn much about the arms race or nuclear weapons in general that I can remember. I do remember we had a project where I chose to go to the Nuclear Science Museum, and that's where, like, inside of that class and outside of that class, I learned the most about nuclear history.
Definitely, it was like a story based on the perspective of us and how we, U.S. in the context of the world, and how we came along and saved everyone. Not only that, but we weren't asked to question what we did was right or wrong. We were just told that we had to do it. We weren't asked if it was, we weren't asked to inquire about, like, would have really a million more people died during the war if we didn't drop the bomb, or would have the Japanese surrender sooner?
Well, it is interesting because I read this and I see, okay, well, this content standard of, in order to understand the complexity of the human experience, and I see several narratives on this sheet that we're definitely taught as very incomplete and weren't the full picture growing up in the schools.
Everyone else, I suppose. They weren't necessarily left out, but their roles were minimized, or maybe not even emphasized at all.
Natives of New Mexico, minority groups, who is being inflicted on by this type of energy, what is actually being... I don't think we ever talked about waste either. We never talked about anything that involved the after aspects of what we used it for, only what was like current and what needed to be done to do it, but never what happened to it afterwards.
Definitely people who didn't participate in that. Like I can only imagine like people in Los Alamos who weren't like in the bomb efforts, or people who were there beforehand, and then like you know what I mean? Like a lot of the untold stories, I feel like no one really questions it or narrates it or cares to, because it's just like bomb, and that's our big contribution.
It's kind of like what we kind of perceive as being reality was actually reality, right? So, for example, right, yeah, sure, on the surface level, like these high tech industries and the role of science in New Mexico is ostensibly a good thing, right? It builds jobs, builds the economy, but really it's also in essence create kind of a colony of sorts of Hispanic people that surround the Santa Fe and Los Alamos areas, right? And so that is something they don't teach you in the classroom. That is a narrative that we kind of ignore here in the state of New Mexico. And so, if we're talking about the complexity of the human experience, how can you not acknowledge these and still, I guess, essentially say that we're understanding the complexity?
What does it mean when those that grew up in the place where the nuclear weapons industry was born feel as though their educational understandings of this industry are fragmented? How do we make sense of our educational experiences as New Mexicans when our narratives are not represented? Cognitive justice is recognizing the diversity of knowledge, understanding, and of narratives. It is the presence of equality for all knowers. When will New Mexico see cognitive justice in the nuclear story? In a very ironic turn of events, while I've been waiting to get into Trinity, the Ring of Fire started playing on the radio.
I fell into a burning ring of fire. I went down, 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 and the flames went higher. And it burns, 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 the ring of fire, the ring of fire. I fell into...
All right. We're gonna do a Q&A, questions and comments at the very end with everybody. So one more round of applause for Haley. And next up is Lozen Benson.
Never used a microphone before. Wait, oh God. I don't like it.
Hold it like this directly.
Okay. So my project is called From Theoretical to Literal: The Transformation of Wasteland Ideologies to Desperate Realities in Nuclearism. So what I did for my project is I did a literary analysis of Laura Nader and Hugh Gusterson's Nuclear Legacies. There's 4 principles of nuclearism. And I brought in like a secondary text to evaluate each of those, and they're nuclear colonialism, secrecy, othering, and mass numbing. And they're what create the system and sustain it. Next. Yes. Sorry. Yeah, next though. So nuclear colonialism, I used a piece by Tracy Voiles, and she describes nuclear colonialism as the process of removing people from a landscape, which is done through conceptualizing the landscape as lesser and the bodies within it as justifully exploitable. This has been seen and materialized through uranium mining and milling in indigenous communities, where people weren't really told that uranium was radioactive and that they could get cancers and birth defects and infertility. So uranium mining and milling is a form of genocide, and it's a system which is only productive or even like reasonably, it just like benefits a very exclusive group of people and doesn't have any regard for the bodies and the people of specific lands that are deemed like exploitable. So next. And so I kind of argue that it's like a system that perpetuates itself. So wastelanding is like a conceptual basis for like saying this land is undesirable and the people within it aren't like worthy, so it's racism and environmental racism. Which then justifies the like active colonization through like employing people in these like uranium mines and mills, which then makes like the land uninhabitable and radioactive, and then the people unhealthy, which like materializes the initial concept of the land and the bodies as like not worthy, which then like re-perpetuates with which I think we see through like uranium mining, and then the land becomes like lesser, and then like now we want to put WIP here too, so we want to like just perpetuate and like bring more nuclear waste and like bad things to New Mexico. So secrecy is the second. Somebody was talking earlier about how like, well, why isn't this in the predominant narrative? Like, why aren't we like learning about this in the news? Okay, sorry. Why aren't we learning about everything about nuclearism in the news because it directly impacts us? You can't hear me. Oh, I'll slow down. I'm sorry. So there's 23 million classifications of records a year, and $9.9 billion dollars of government spending going towards classification of documents. 50% of the information that's classified doesn't need to be classified. It's like a really bizarre relationship between people and the government and accountability with these issues. And in terms of nuclearism, it's under the guise of like safekeeping, which is very peculiar because when you think about the fact that we're bombing, or I guess there haven't been above ground testings, but bombing our own land and like exploiting and ruining our own land so that other people don't is really like a strange concept. Next. Please, thank you. So there's restricted access just in terms of what information people are getting and what information you're not getting. And then information is coded, and you see that even in like your pamphlets, there's all of those acronyms. So it's like even if you have these documents, what kind are you able to interpret what you're saying? Like not really. And then media will introduce things to dismiss them or undermine the source. Thank you. Yeah, and so like I was saying, it's like a very strange relationship between if information is hidden, then one, the government is unaccountable to the public, and two, people don't have, if you know things and you're not actively doing something to like revolt against it, then you're passively consenting to it. So it's like a weird relationship of like, we have to be brave enough to know these things. Othering is the process of like dehumanizing people. I used Eileen Shaughnessy's work for this, and we've like whitewashed history because the predominant narrative is told by the colonizer, not the colonized. And then we've restructured the future as a white space in terms of science being the thing that like guides us through history, and that's like epistemically accessible to only a few group of people. Sorry, guys. Yeah, so progress, science is like leading us, but it's undermining a lot of the like meditative and like actually people as like not mechanisms, and it's like undermining that, which is environmental racism, and is again related to nuclear colonialism. Mass numbing, so that was the fourth and last mechanism of nuclear colonialism. So it's, yeah, like being disconnected from the people who are being impacted by these things. There are 3 active response categories. I used a psychology journal for this, by the way, so that's where that information is coming from. So reconstruction of own behavior or the incident, I think we see that through the justification of bombing Japan. And yeah, like it ended a world war, but in reality it didn't, but that's like the moral justification for that. And then reconstruction of own role in incident, I think we see through like Los Alamos and people like compartmentalizing their jobs. And like, oh, I only work with fission, or I only do this or that, which like discombobulates them from responsibility. A reconstruction of the parties involved, that's othering. And then the argument for nuclearism has been that it was like bombing Japan was bad, but it has like kept us out of war for a long time because mutually assured destruction, MAD, and so it like is justified in that it has been overall a good thing. Thank you. Then that's just not true though. The war was gonna end anyways. And also it's really weird to be like, well, we're suffering now from the things that are producing nuclearism, like from land and like oppression. And so it's weird to think that the suffering we're doing now is like helping us now and in the present. So it's interesting. It's also utilitarianism, which is a form of ethics that values utility over over anything else. So this is like the typical utilitarian thought experiment, and it's like, do you pull this and like redirect the train to kill the one person, or passively allow like 5 people to die? And so, yeah, it's like a very interesting moral like question, and it's like, well, also it has justified a lot of weird things. So my conclusion is just that like science isn't going to save us, and that we need like a new perspective, and I think that we need to be like vulnerable and acknowledge truths that maybe aren't easy, and we need a new cycle. And all knowledge is situated knowledge, so science has to be more like inclusive and not just like a numerical value system that has resulted in a lot of weird things. And then sources. That is my next. Cool, thank you.
All right. Next we have Jana Garfield.
So my project was women and the biological impacts of nuclearism. And there is a slight watermark on some of the slides. Just overlook that. Yeah, sure. Actually, wait a second, sorry. So the feminist and ecological movements are closely tied in that the mindset that is feeding the environmental degradation and human injustice is similar, if not the same, that is caused by exploitation, the value of the male role, and the inequality for the female gender. Historically, the rhetoric of science is male-dominated and devalues female intellectual contributions. Often, women are subjugated as sex symbols, incubators, and marginalized into doing some simple household tasks. We can compare the historical nuclear movements and the physicality of women in that they are both desired, exploited, and under-discussed. No problem. Okay. Go ahead. So this is a time-lapse of the portraits that I did regarding the women that I focused on that were biologically affected by nuclearism. The first portrait that you'll see me working on is of Nisan Lucan from Rongelap, who was affected by the Castle Bravo blast in 1946. That stood at 15 megatons and was being the largest tested in the thermonuclear device, being tested as the largest thermonuclear device. This vaporized the futures and surrounding environment of the Marshall Islands. The signs of radiation exposures were evident in that the 3 days following the blast, plants were wrinkled and died. People were so unaware that the white fallout powder was dangerously radioactive that they freely let children play in the substance like it was snow. It coated the ground, trees, water supplies, and human bodies. Within hours, sickness set in, such as vomiting, diarrhea, and visible burns. After people returned to the atoll in 1957, they were unknowingly used as human experiments in Project 4.1, which was a secret study by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, which focused on the human interaction on the heavily contaminated land. Lucan was only 4 years old when her family returned to the atoll and remembers people getting blisters on their feet from walking on the sand and in their mouths from eating the native foods. Women had the most common birth defects. They explained it as jellyfish babies. These babies were born with no bones in their bodies and with transparent skin like grapes. She said, and this is a quote, that many women die from abnormal pregnancies, and those survived give birth to what people look like giant purple grapes, which we quickly hide and bury. The second portrait you will see me focusing on is of a Japanese woman by the name of Setsudo Koda. She was a member of the Fukushima Women Against Nukes. Satsudo was born in the Iwaki city of Fukushima, Japan. And after the accident, everyone evacuated from there, which she and many people returned to the Koriyama city in Fukushima. She immediately saw the state of cleanup, cover-ups, and untruths. She helped organize the many nonviolent protests, and she says, "Our movement is conservative, and I mean in the way that activism is old, in my opinion. The movement requires women's intuitiveness, carefulness, and composed sense." She then shares what is an invisible pressure and an oppressive atmosphere imposed on the freedom of speech. We hardly say that there's a very dangerous situation or that it's okay for children to be evacuated. They don't really discuss it there in Japan. And for people like her who speak out, it is in the overwhelming minority. The aftermath of Fukushima accident, Japan has declared a state of denuclearization, but regarding with the Fukushima issue, many residents are concerned with the legislation and action regarding the children's evacuation. However, actually, Fukushima seems to be supposed by the skillful manipulation that was discussed by Lozin in the aspects of nuclearism. Forcing the dilution of the biological issues through money and political titles, along with power in small and regional communities. She closes with the reminder that the movement requires women's biological compassion. And so the last one, which you've already seen, was my self-portrait. I was born in Tula, Russia, which was a land that was directly impacted from the downwind of the Chernobyl 1986 disaster. This was unique in the event which was the first event in history of a commercial nuclear power incident where radiation was directly related to documented deaths. And this was about 30 workers and a few firefighters that were immediately affected in the 3 months after. It was a direct consequence of the Cold War isolation, and that resulted in a lack of safety culture, which then released economic disruption for large populations of Belarus, Russia, and the Ukraine. Mental health coupled with smoking, alcohol abuse is very much a greater problem than the irradiation. But worst of all time was the underlying level of health and nutrition. In my self-portraits, in my portraits, you can see that the woman from Ronjlat was looking to the left, I was looking to the right, and the woman from Fukushima was looking down the middle. We are also all in water, which is the basis of all life. And that is basically the medium connecting all of our physical locations. We are looking into the different directions of the future of our nuclear future and hopefully our anti-nuclear future as well. Thank you.
Brennan, it's the three peoples. I think it's Natasha B, yeah. Okay, all right. So next up we have a group of students from the Sustainability 334 class. Jordan Anderson, who is here, Trenton Ward, Natasha Panetta, and George Davis.
So our project was addressing environmental racism in art, and we decided to specifically address New Mexico's tricultural myth and the Three Peoples mural in Zimmerman Library, which is here on campus. Next. Just give you some time to read this. Oh, sorry. There's a reason for the familiar ring of what we call the status quo. What exists now is comfortable and known, and to some degree, it works. It makes sense. At some point, the attitude, the policy, or the practice made sense to adopt, at least for some person or institution. So changing it to something new requires a considerable shift. When you try and change an opinion or policy, what do you utilize? Communication. And that's why we're all here today. So what did we do? In such a delicate and crucial time in our country, we decided that we needed to combat the apathy that exists today. Many memorials and murals essentially celebrate the subjugation and genocide of indigenous people and glorify the conquerors. We propose that the controversial Three Peoples mural located in Zimmerman Library be addressed. The mural depicts the Anglo man as being the most powerful. It proposes a problem on the campus because many students that are from indigenous or Latino backgrounds have to walk by this mural daily. Additionally, the mural supports the tricultural myth that states that only white, indigenous, and Latino cultures have been placed in New Mexico. While these cultures may be our most dominant, they are completely disregarding the other members of our community, such as members from Asian or African descent. We set out to collect all the information we could currently being done on the mural to respect all the work that has been done so far. This led us to create a space for our community members to engage in an intimate discussion, and we held this in the Willowed Room, which is the glass room right next to the mural itself. And our community created a powerful conversation concerning one of the most taboo topics of our time, the existence of racism. So our first guest speaker was Noel Marquez. This is one of his murals. He is a native New Mexican who's been working on murals for quite some time, and a lot of his work speaks to the environmental injustices that exist in New Mexico.
This is our second speaker, Mr. Alex Lubin, who is a professor of American Studies and assistant provost. He's also teaches at the University of Beirut. He's also an activist and served as director of the Center for American Studies and Research at the American University of Beirut. Alex is published academic scholar in various journals and offered classes next semester about what should be done with the mural and working towards making conversations and actions. As he has been involved with the mural's work for quite some time, we thought it was vital to bring him on board.
All right, so environmental justice. It is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. There are 17 principles of environmental justice. And we'll go to the next slide. We also decided to address environmental racism, which describes the fact that people of color and low-income people are most likely to be situated near sources of contamination and away from clean water, air, and soil. Next. Settler colonialism is a distinct type of colonialism that functions through the replacement of indigenous populations with an invasive settler society that over time develops a distinctive identity and sovereignty. And unfortunately, us in New Mexico are no strangers to environmental injustices, racism, or settler colonialism. It is powerful for us to come together and address these issues. Without further ado, let's look at some of the racist elements portrayed through art and in the UNM and New Mexican communities.
So here we have some statues of conquistadors, which in my opinion are very similar and comparable to the Confederate statues that have been causing so many problems throughout our country. They're reminders of a terrible and genocidal past. We have Don Diego de Vargas on the upper left and Don Juan de Oñate on the upper right. And I mean, look, we have buildings that are named after these people on UNM campus. You know, it really doesn't make a lot of sense. There's an obelisk at Santa Fe Plaza that reads, "To the heroes who've fallen in the battle with savages throughout the territory of New Mexico." Savage Indians, excuse me, and the word savage was crossed out and someone put in courageous, which I thought was pretty cool. And yeah, I thought this was a good sign. We should celebrate resistance, not conquest, you know. Another shining example of how improperly we name our sacred buildings, like our mall is named after, well, for Americans, malls are pretty sacred. But yeah, another conquistador and murderer of indigenous peoples, you know, his name is put on our mall. It makes no sense to me. And I remember I grew up in Taos, and my dad refused to take me to Kit Carson Park because of all the, I mean, look, he was America's greatest Indian fighter, you know? It's like, so we give him a park? Like, makes no sense. And then just some more examples of UNM questionable iconography. Conquistadors on either side, and you know, it is basically saying what Indians, you know. I mean, that was the seal that was on our diplomas up until a couple years ago. Thank God we were able to get rid of that, which I think is excellent and a start in the right direction. And we believe that this Three Peoples mural should be relocated, and I found what I thought was a great place to relocate it: the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia and Art. And this is actually on a Michigan State university, so they've actually put it in their own university, so I believe maybe it's time that UNM creates something of a similar venue. Next slide. And just a little background on the tricultural myth. In the late 1800s, L. Bradford Prince, who would go on to be the territorial governor of New Mexico, was trying to achieve statehood and monetary gain for New Mexico through the use of the tricultural myth, because many other states throughout the U.S. who had smaller populations had been admitted into statehood, but their populations were made up of largely Anglo people. So you can see the racist rhetoric here. It's the three groups are the Pueblos, the Mexicans, and the Americans. So from its origin, these other people were not even considered Americans. And the myth asserts that there's three separate ethnic groups that exist in harmony, and I thought it was interesting, just the Americans whose energy and enterprise are bringing all the appliances of modern science and invention to develop this almost limitless resources which nature has bestowed upon us. So I think this kind of paves the way for nuclear colonialism and the military-industrial complex. You got a bunch of pretty scary rhetoric up here. And it also links the Native Americans to the past and the Mexicans to conquistadors, which I don't think anybody wants to be linked to either one of those.
So in this slide, you see the native indigenous people commodifying their culture and working the land. I also wanted to comment a little bit about the fact that the University of New Mexico was one of the largest native serving institutions in the United States. And I think it's absolutely criminal that we force students to live in halls named after Oñate, who cut off the leg of like every indigenous person from the Zuni Acoma Pueblo over, or every fighting age male over the age of like 14. Then go to the next one. Then right here you see like the Chicano, Mexicano, or Hispanic, Latinx people also doing manual labor, which they're with the church in the background, you know. Go to the next one. And then
So this slide is shows the Anglo side of the the tricultural myth. So everyone in this on this canvas is white. The baby is white, and we thought that kind of symbolized like that they're saying the future belongs to white people. And what this slide is kind of saying is like really like the only important technological advancements and like science things belonged to the Anglo race, as if like indigenous peoples or people of color didn't contribute anything to this field. Next slide, please. And so then like this canvas kind of romanticized like Anglo culture. It's like, first of all, the white person's the only one with any facial features, and then he's centered in the canvas, and this is kind of saying like indigenous and people of color wouldn't have gotten anywhere without white man's help, which I'm sure we all know is completely false.
So when we changed the racist seal, one of the demands was that UNM would take down these murals, and at the moment they haven't, but hopefully we're starting a conversation of correcting like these like historical wrongs, such as these inaccurate representations and repatriation of sacred artifacts that UNM holds.
So in the end, we thought that our panel discussion had a really good outcome. We created a safe space for people to kind of voice their concerns, their complaints. We actually had a lot of people who worked in the library come to our event and discuss how they felt seeing these murals every day for however long that they'd worked here. Students who lived on campus and how they felt about having to see this and what it meant to them as an indigenous person or a person of color. So right now it was also a good space for discussion on how we're gonna fix the problem and what we can do. We even had someone get in contact with one of our speakers, and they are looking into the legality of the process of getting it removed, since at this point I'm not sure if UNM is gonna do it for us, but we're just gonna have to take matters into our own hands.
All right. So I just want to, just a reminder to the audience, please do not heckle the students. Please create a safe space for these students. This is a scary thing to do, to present their research, that I'm throwing them in the deep end here, having them present in front of you. And they worked hard, so we want to celebrate their work. And I just want to say one thing about that last group. So they put together this event and invited so many people, and it was packed. It was packed. And I don't think something like that has ever happened necessarily in that exact way. There's been a lot of work around this mural over the years, and they honored that work. But there's kind of a momentum growing, and so I really want to celebrate that. And I also want to say about Jana's work, that her art is in the lobby, the beautiful woodblock pieces that you saw her creating. So please be sure to take some time to go into the lobby and see her work, and talk to her, talk to the artists, talk to the students, and also take in all of the other art that's out there. So next up we have Trenton Ward, who had the bad luck or the good luck of being in 2 of my classes.
Hello, good afternoon. My project was examining the nuclear legacies and Superfund sites as like social determinants of health here in the state of New Mexico. Today I'll start off by providing some context providing a basic definition of social determinants of health, and as well social determinants of health framework, and the research question. The research question driving this paper was, does living near a Superfund site impact health outcomes? And then I'll go over my research methods, define Superfund, a snapshot of a Superfund site, and then the results, and finally a conclusion. So race proved to be the most significant among variables tested in association with location of commercial and hazardous waste facilities. This represented a consistent national pattern according to Toxic Waste and Race in the United States, a national report on racial and social economic characteristics of communities with hazardous waste sites. So the social determinants of health defined by the World Health Organization is the condition in which people are born, grow, work, and live and age in the wider set of forces and systems of shaping the conditions of daily life, shaping the conditions of daily life. So this is the context in which people live their lives, which includes like in systems of colonialism, patriarchy, and poverty. So basically, a Superfund site are sites that that the EPA pretty much has to clean up. They're just contaminated sites. It's informally called Superfund. These include like mines, landfills, oil spills, a variety of different environmental. My bad. Can we go to the next one? So I'm using survey data conducted by the RWJF Center for Health Policy at UNM. It focused on investigating the relationship between social determinants and health outcomes in the state of New Mexico. The study relies on a sample provided by a mix of cell phone and landline household, as well as like an online survey, and they interviewed 1,505 people responded to this, and all of the interviewers were also bilingual too. So the survey had so out of that 1,505 people interviewed, 109 of those lived in zip codes with the Superfund site. I split them into two groups to compare how they responded, and to see if there's any correlation between living in a zip code with a Superfund site and higher rates of cancer or asthma or different health outcomes. You can go next. I hypothesized that the survey data would reflect the trend of higher reported rates of cancer and health problems for people who live in Superfund site areas. I was originally going to include Los Alamos and Church Rock, but unfortunately there were no respondents from those areas. But I did add Tularosa because to the Superfund site group because of the legacy of the first Trinity test. I also wanted to see if there was any significant percentages and differences among them in racial and gender categories, as well as in formal education and reported incomes. So here's a map of the Superfund sites here in the state of New Mexico. We have 20 of them, and most of them are located on the Rio Grande. Two here in Albuquerque are located in the South Valley, which is historically been like a Chicanx, Latinx community. And go to the next slide. So these are just a list of all of the Superfund sites. Next one, please. Here's the Laguna Jack Powell mine, which is we visited during one of our field trips, and basically this mine dispossessed the Laguna people of their culture, of their land, and of their water, basically, and caused a lot of health problems. So these are the kind of sites that we're talking about here. And this is a uranium mine. Put it in the next. So here are some of the demographics. Most of the people interviewed were U.S. born. A larger percent of people living in Superfund site areas were born in New Mexico. And they also reported people living in near Superfund sites also had a report having a familiar connection to the land also than those who did not. So here are some of the reports. Some of the respondents. They're pretty even, like on high cholesterol, diabetes, like heart disease, obesity, cancer, even. But here's where there's like significant disparities in areas such as high blood pressure, asthma, and higher rates of mental health problems in this. Also, people report lower. There was a lower rate of people claiming the identity of white living next to Superfund sites, and also women tended to live in zip codes with Superfund sites more than those who didn't. Then here's a look at some of the incomes. People living in areas without Superfunds tend to make more. They also tended to have more formal education as well. The data showed disparities between the sample groups in disease prevalence. People living near Superfund sites reported significantly higher rates of asthma and high blood pressure. Those who do not reported experiencing less mental health problems. There are also disparities among racial, gender, and education and economic lines. More women reported living in zip codes with Superfund funds, as well as those with lower education and income. The Superfund group also tended to be made up of higher percentages of folks who identified in some racial categories other than white. This project echoes findings from the recent study done by the New Mexico Women organization that showed socioeconomic determinants such as income inequalities and the intersection of race and place impact women's health and well-being. They also found that that environmental contamination and pollution undermine community health. That's it. And then I painted this too, and if you want to email me, thank you.
All right, we just have a couple more student presentations. As you can see, some of them combine art and interdisciplinary approaches to looking at these topics, which, as we've talked about all weekend, is really important as far as getting the full picture. So I hope you're getting inspired here. All right, next up we have Alexandra Quijano.
Hi, everybody. My name is Alexandra, and I was in Eileen's Nuclear New Mexico class. What I decided to do for my project was to create a basic overview for children who are in elementary school level or still at the level where they're reading with their parents, so that the knowledge would go from the children to the people who are reading around them. And I wanted to do this because until I took this class in my last year of college, I didn't know a lot of the stuff that we're learning about, and I felt that I didn't have enough time to do enough with the information as I would have if I had learned about it sooner. So my goal was to include enough about the nuclear industry and information about radiation that you would have a basic overview and understanding of it to do something with the information while also not overloading kids and their parents or making it too political or kind of scary, because that ended up being like an issue, right? It's a really daunting topic to talk about. So my hope is that after creating a book like this, that we can start to change the idea that the radiation that we have in our environment and the creation of nuclear energy and radioactive weapons, to change it from being okay to something that we talk about and we all know about and we can change. So what I had to go through to create this book was to think about what is important, what do you need to know, and what can be left out for this age level of kids. And then I wanted to, at the end and during the inside of pages, to explain a little bit about the information that I'm giving and kind of give a little bit of empowerment to whoever's reading the book, so that you may get this frightening information, but then you understand it and you have a little bit more courage to take on these topics. So I'm just going to give a little overview about what I talked about in the book. I made a little mock of the book. It's being printed now, so it'll be out later. So if you wanted to look at this after, it's here. And I also partnered up with a friend of mine who's an artist, and he created some illustrations for the book as well. So first, the important thing is to know the difference between non-ionizing radiation and ionizing radiation, because the difference is very important. And we need to know what people are talking about when they tell you this is how much radiation you get in a year, but you need to know what kind of radiation it is. So I went into that a little bit in the front. Then I talked about the basis of the nuclear industry that we mostly get when we're in school. So I talked about the Trinity site and also the bombings on Japan. But then I went into the less known testing after that, and also accidents that happened that I didn't know about, which kind of disturbed me. But I left out the political part of the history, because I feel like that part of the narrative people tend to change just depending on what your views are, and I feel like it should be up to the children reading to decide what they think about it. So then I put in the nuclear decay timeline, but a very simplified version, because it's easier to understand that it's a problem for a long time. So when you tell someone there's this radiation and it's a big problem, in your mind it's kind of, oh, people don't talk about it, it must kind of go away. But I wanted them to understand that it's a problem that generations and generations will have to deal with, including their own. But I wanted to leave out the too much detail in between that may confuse you and make you kind of turn away from the information. Then I talked a little bit about how radiation spreads. So from the environment to people to water to the different tools used in the process. Just a little overview of how that would happen. And then I went into a little more detail about the impacts that radiation has on the body, because that's more right where you're focused on. How does it influence me? So I talked about the difference between a healthy body and a body that has radiation inside. where this radiation is stored, and a little bit about how, like iodine tablets and things like that, how you can try to prevent it if you're feeling a little scared about the information. And then I tried to leave out the like doom and gloom of how well or not well treatment works and the testings that have been done of why they know that this happens to the body. Then I went into the nuclear waste chain because it's important to know like, how it actually happens. So we started out in mining, and then each step you have waste. So the mining creates waste from tailings and the tools used around that. And then after that to enrichment, and then either to energy or to making weapons. So I just wanted to explain where it comes from and then where it goes and how that's a problem, because there's so many steps and each step releases more waste into the environment. Then I thought it was important to explain what waste is, because the term is kind of abstract in this context, because when you think of waste without knowing what this is, it kind of just sounds like you threw like some paper, there's a mine there, and they have garbage, and that's the waste that we're talking about. But I wanted to make it clear that waste from radiation is something that is going to be a problem for a really long time. It's been contaminated by radiation, and now we have to do something with it and get rid of it, and we really don't have a way to do that. Then on the same note, I went into a little more detail on the different types of waste. So low level, high level, intermediate, and kind of discussing how there are different levels of waste, but they're all very dangerous to us just because the way they are made changes their categorization. And then a little bit more about the nuclear reactor waste. So how that is actually more dangerous because it is going through fission for so much longer. Then I included a little map of the closed and open nuclear reactors in the United States, just to give a perspective of where they are and where they aren't, and kind of let you look at that, see where you live, and know your relation to the industry. And then I left out the proposed plants and spills and storage and things like that, because I feel like that's a little more heated and a little more scary to think about when you're a child. Then on my final pages, I wanted to reflect on the information. So kind of give an overview of what you've learned and what you might be feeling about it, and then give a little bit of what you can do now. So be aware of your surroundings and tell people, be informed, and then attempt to stop further reactors in your area or protect your body in your own way. And then I also included a little bit about how we are trying to stop the radiation process, and also to figure out ways which the environment we can help, like with mushrooms and how they reduce radiation in soils and things like that, just to kind of leave it on a lighter note than all of this information coming down on you. And so, like I said at the beginning, the hope is that this book will empower kids to create change and know more about their environment while they're younger, and then have it as something you think about when you're growing up instead of something you learn about when you're already like an adult. So that was my hope from creating the book. Thank you.
All right, and maybe we can pass Alex's book around so that people can get a sense of what she created there. Next up, we have Natasha Phelps.
Okay, so hi, my name's Tasha. I was in Eileen's Nuclear New Mexico class, and I am majoring in philosophy here at UNM. This video covers some of the doubts and remorse of the Manhattan Project scientists, and kind of how they felt when they were making the bombs and after they were dropped. I tried to capture their uncertainty and regret they had that they carried with them through their lives. So, enjoy.
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
I'm sure people wonder how the atomic bombs were created in the first place. Did the Manhattan Project scientists know they were creating some of the deadliest superweapons known to man, paving way for even deadlier ones? What were the philosophies behind the bombs? The head scientists knew what they were creating, but they were unaware of what the results would be. However, they did know it would be powerful and destructive. After the Trinity test, it was clear that this new type of bomb was more terrifying than anything humankind had ever seen. This was proven to be true when 2 atomic bombs were dropped on August 6, 1945 on Hiroshima and August 9, 1945 on Nagasaki, Japan. More than 80,000 innocent civilians died instantly in Hiroshima and 40,000 in Nagasaki. Women, children, fathers, mothers, innocent people. What do the scientists have to say about this?
I would like to think now that that I, at the time of the German defeat, that I would have stopped, taken stock, thought it all over very carefully, and that I would have walked away from Los Alamos at that time. And I, in terms of all of everything that I believe in, before and during and after the war, I cannot understand why I did not make that act. On the other hand, it simply was not in the air. I do not know of a single instance of anyone who had made that suggestion or who did leave at the time. There might have been someone that I didn't know, but at the time, it just was not something that was part of our lives. Our life was directed to do one thing. It's as though we had been programmed to do that, and we, as automatons, were doing it. I organized a small meeting at our building. I think the title was "The Impact of the Gadget on Civilization." Hoppy tried to persuade me not to have it. I don't know quite why, but he certainly did try to dissuade me. On the other hand, I went ahead and did hold the meeting, and perhaps between 30 and 50 people came. Hoppy came too, which added always added tone to any meeting. We did discuss whether we should go on or not, and in the context of what was happening in the world. Of course, it was called in the context that perhaps what we were doing was morally wrong. Particularly, Hoppy pointed out that, but it would be well that the world knew about the possibility of an atomic bomb, rather than it be something that would be kept secret while the United Nations was being formed. On that basis, on that logical basis,
Oppenheimer had the same remorse after the bomb for not informing Japan how disastrous this weapon was, but yet did not regret building it. He stated,
I have no remorse about the making of the bomb in Trinity. That was done right. As for how we used it, I understand why it happened and appreciate with what nobility those men with whom I've worked made the decision. But I do not have the feeling that it was done right. The ultimatum to Japan was full of pious platitudes. Our government should have acted with more foresight and clarity in telling the world and Japan what the bomb meant.
The information wasn't needed in such a hurry anymore, but it just would have been against the culture of the time and place to stop and say, this is too dangerous, let's not do it. After the Trinity explosion, Oppenheimer said, now the physicists have known sin. I had not earlier heard any statements doubting that this was a good thing to do. I'm sure that older and wiser people probably did have such discussions. I was a 19-year-old kid. I don't know that that statement of Oppenheimer's really contributed to the discussion afterward, but it was a bit of a shock when we heard about it.
What could the United States have done differently? Did we have to drop the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki to force their surrender? According to the Los Angeles Times, Truman called it the greatest thing in history. America's military leaders didn't share his exuberance. 7 of America's 8 five-star officers in 1945, Jens Dwight Eisenhower, Douglas MacArthur, and Henry Arnold, as well as Administrator William Levy, Chester Nimitz, Ernest King, and William Halsey, later called the atomic bombings either militarily unnecessary, morally reprehensible, or both. Lee, who is Truman's personal chief of staff, wrote in his memoir that the Japanese were already defeated and ready to surrender.
The decision to drop the second bomb on Nagasaki after such a short time, even at the time, I had my doubts about that. It seemed unnecessary. We had not given them time to organize themselves to surrender.
And many generals even stated that dropping the bombs were not necessary for the surrender of Japan. Many of the people who worked at Trinity, from scientists to workers of all kinds, put all their effort into creating and building the bombs. But not all of them agreed with what they were used for in the end. As seen by just the few people in this video, they had understood that what they had created was such a powerful weapon that had the capability of destroying vast amounts of land, taking the lives of tens of thousands of people, not even including mining victims and later victims of the fallout at Trinity, the people of Tularosa. This was such a huge landmark in history that marked the beginning of a new era where one person could have the godlike powers by controlling a weapon of this magnitude. In the end, we as people need to learn that based on the remorse and sorrow of the scientists at the Manhattan Project, nuclear technology advancements and production must come to an end.
All right, we have one more student presentation, and then we'll do a quick Q&A with the students. Gabrielle Hines-Brown.
All right, so I did some research on fear, mortality, and popular culture in the nuclear age. Next. So some of the questions I wanted to answer in this project were, how do we define the nuclear age, and was it really from the 1940s to the 1990s, as some historians argue, or are we currently in a nuclear age right now? There's some ambiguities with that. Second, how did the bomb affect our collective notion of mortality? And how do we think of the death in an age with weapons of mass destruction? What is nuclear fear and how do we cope with it? And how does popular culture affect how the public perceives these issues? Next. So I'm going to start off with the conception of the bomb, which is what started it all. So the invention of the bomb, it instigated a shift in how we grasp the concept of death. So because we now have this tool that people in power can use to kill millions of people, we have to grasp this concept of death as an individual and also as a species. So Robert Lifton, he had this quote, the appearance of nuclear weapons in the 1940s evoked an image that of man's extermination of himself as a species with his own technology. So he also brought up, like I said, the concept of death versus total death. And he said that the fundamental psychic deformation of the nuclear age is the merging of the two, associating individual death with total death. So psychologists recognized this shift during the Cold War. So a lot of behavioral studies were conducted to kind of examine how people were affected by this. Studies show that there was a very prominent presence of nuclear anxiety among children and adults. Mostly children, however, they exhibited a lot of signs of distress, and they themselves said that the source of their anxiety were nuclear war, which a lot of it did originate from the propaganda shown in schools about the Soviets and how to keep yourself safe in event of a nuclear attack. And as kids grew older, the fear became more of a subconscious thing. But interest in nuclear war was definitely sustained through popular culture. So the authors Zeman and Amundsen, they categorize atomic popular culture into 4 categories. Number 1 was early atomic culture. And this was characterized by the celebration of World War II ending, patriotism, and also the new breakthroughs in science brought about by the nuclear age. Second was high atomic culture. There's a lot of media surrounding the uranium boom as something that was exciting and prosperous. There was also tourism involving that during that age. And then post-atomic culture. Post-atomic culture. The authors, they said it was from 1991 to present, but they wrote it in 2004, so I argue that it did end around that time in 2004, and that we are now in a new age of atomic culture. My goal was not to make this presentation a political statement, but to ignore this would be to ignore a huge elephant in the room, because this is serious and we can't ignore it, and it needs to be acknowledged that we have a president who has basically inadvertently threatened to start a nuclear war with North Korea. And so because of that, the fears and anxiety from the Cold War are no longer dormant. And so I have observed 3 characteristics from this new age, so to say, that we've entered. So number 1, mockery. So I found this quote, mockery does not entrain fear but dispels it, and that's by Spencer Wirt. And so we're not taking imminent nuclear war seriously. I mean, in this room we are, I think. But as a whole, I don't think we're taking it seriously enough. And we cope with it by making fun of it, and I think that's been propagated by the age of social media and stuff like that. So I've also observed flat out denial of nuclear issues and conflicts. I have come across articles that say that they claim that it's illegal for Trump to launch nuclear codes. It could be illegal under international law, but under the constitutional law, it's totally legal. We can't just deny that. It's a fact. I have also seen people deny that radiation is an issue. Next. So that's my favorite one. We are also in a new age of dissent and activism. It's been going on forever, but I think that we have entered a new age where people are really waking up and realizing that we have to address these issues. I'd like to especially highlight Indigenous and women-led activist movements. They have been at the forefront of the nuclear movement since it began, and I believe that dismantling the nuclear base would not be possible without them. That's it.
All right, let's bring the students back up here. We'll have everybody line up here. All right. Celebration of lots of hard work over the semester. And they were very excited to share their work with you all. So are there any questions that anyone has? Sue, can you help with that? Okay, Diane's got a question. Any other questions? And then Kevin, anybody else? I'll take Stack. Okay, go. Okay, go for it, Kevin. Oh.
Just a couple quick questions. The author of the children's book, I don't remember people's names, about the
Alex.
mushrooms as a hopeful thing. It came up yesterday too. I don't know if you were here, but the concern that the mushrooms are now radioactive. And so just to be sure, just very quickly in Chernobyl, after Chernobyl in Belarus, there was an international program to help clean up soil. And plants were used, I don't remember which kind. And they forgot to inform the farmers that the plants are now radioactive. They were left believing that it's just a magical cure, and they actually fed the plants to their cows, which contaminated the cows. So that danger. And my second question was the last speaker just now. I'm struggling with the constitutional legality of the president. I know what you said about international law, it's against international law, but I think there's an argument to be made in US law that it's also, and I know they're struggling in Congress right now with that question. How can one person, the president, have this ability? Like Congress is supposed to appropriate the money for everything and declare war. So if the president starts a war with a nuclear bomb, how is that legal? Congress didn't say to do that, so.
Does this work? Okay. Yeah, so there was a, I forgot the exact name of it, but there was a committee meeting and they assessed the authority that Trump has over launching the codes. That was just an assessment of the regulations that are currently set in, but right now there is a specific process that the president can go through to launch nuclear codes. And that's still set in place. I'm not sure exactly like the whole bureaucracy of it, but if an event were to happen, but right now it's kind of set that he can go through that process, and it's not a very lengthy process either.
I think it's 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Right here? Wait, Joni, do you want to say something about that?
The Constitution is very clear that Congress is the only entity that can declare war. And part of the hearing that Senator Corker had a couple weeks ago, and I'm just offering this as history. So during the Vietnam War, when I was in junior high school, the Gulf of Tonkin event happened, and they said that the president could declare war, and Congress didn't act. So it's a really important fact for your generation to know as we continue to discuss this whole thing with North Korea, that it was a scam back then, and they're trying to perpetuate it to continue that to now. So I just offer that as not a criticism, but it was a scam back then, and we thought that we didn't have any power to really challenge it. But it goes to the core of what national security is for the United States. And the people here, when we give our power, you know, the power is with the people. We give our power to these people who, as other people describe, you know, get corporation funding, blah, 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 blah. I'll get off my soapbox.
It also challenges democracy, I think, because when we have a president who has the ability to launch nuclear weapons without checks or balances, and we supposedly elected this person, where's the democracy in that decision? I think that's something that we've also brought up throughout the semester. Oh, wait, there was another question though for Alex. Alex, did you want to?
Oh, is it on? Okay, there we go. So at the end of the book, all of the things I addressed were just little tidbits. So I just informed them that this is something people are working on. I didn't necessarily spend a whole page or anything on it. It was just included in there. So I feel like it would be a totally separate book to go into things like that. So it's just a basic overview.
This is really great. Each and every one of these was so impressive. Thank you so much for all that work. So I have two questions. One is general. I saw that everybody is quoting Robert J. Lifton, and I probably should know who that is, but I don't. So if somebody could tell me about who that is. And then the second question is for Trenton. I wanted to know about the statistical significance of those comparisons that you made between the, you know, when you had the bar graphs and the difference between the characteristics that were different between the people by Superfund sites and the people that weren't.
Yeah, we've seen pretty significant differences between the groups in areas of asthma and high blood pressure, as well as reporting higher mental health problems. In the paper I go into it a lot more, and obviously there are some like problems with working with survey data, and we need in that area needs to be like researched more, the actual impacts of contamination and public health. It was just a basic comparison.
There was a question about Robert J. Lifton.
Yeah, who wants to take that one?
So Robert J. Lifton, I think he's a psychologist. So the reason why we all probably cited him is because we read a lot, him in Eileen's class, but some of us used him for additional research, but he's a great guy. He writes about a lot of nuclear issues kind of in the realm of social psychology. Yeah.
What term did he coin?
Nuclearism.
Any other questions? Okay. Yeah.
First off, really thanks again for everybody doing the hard work. The question I had for the idea of can Trump launch everything and basically end the world as we know it. We do have a constitution that still says that the power resides in the Congress to do war. And what we're confusing here is that an act is standing on the principle of the thing. I don't know if you can think about that a little bit, but yes, we do have elected representatives and they can make acts, okay, an act of Congress, which they did. The War Powers Act in 1975 gave the powers on over to the president, supposedly, to go ahead and do war, as long as he got back to Congress in 60 days, was it 30 days? I'm trying to remember. 60 days, and said, I had a war going on, and I hope you like it, and please fund it. Okay, that's a really bad idea. We never changed our Constitution by the amendment process, which is required by our Constitution. If you want to change something as radical as that, you have to go through the amendment process to get it done. Our Congress did not do that and continues to fall back on this, allowing every president since 1975 to go play war. And that's a really bad idea. And then
Do you have a question?
Yes, the question I had on the, well, another comment on the last one is that there's 2 boats going out and within inside of the next 6 months. One is going out in about 2 weeks. It's called the Golden Rule, which originally was supposed to go out to the Marshall Islands with the Veterans for Peace to oppose the dropping of more bombs out in that area for experimentation purposes, and it sort of got sunk. We still don't know who ended up doing it, but it's heading back out there again. And then the other one is by Dana Durnforth, who is with, he's called himself the nuclear proctologist, and he's going to go up the Vancouver coast to check on radiation out there. So, and the question I have is, if you could do this all over again, what would each one of you do a little differently?
Again.
Making it a better program, now that you've seen
A better program?
a better program, like what we're doing here today. Just a quick, one-liner.
Okay, does somebody want to comment?
I think really quickly in response to the discussion of the Constitution, it's really important to realize, and I think for our generation, it's hard to conceptualize a government that congressionally recognizes war, because we grew up in the War on Terror. That's not a recognized war that was authorized through the Defense Authorization Act. So I think that frames a lot of our perspective on that topic specifically, because we have seen a war being fought for our literal whole lives that was never authorized by Congress. So I think that's important to consider, but I didn't have an answer to the question.
Well, I feel very proud of these students. I think they did a great job. I wouldn't change a thing, frankly. So we're gonna move on unless there's any other quick questions. Any other quick questions? And I just want to point out what these students are doing is very unique, and I really did throw them in the pit of the fire by putting them in front of you all in particular with these projects. They had 1 semester to do this, but I just want to point out that many of these projects will be available on nuclearnewmexico.com, and over the course that this class has been taught, there have been a number of projects that have been archived and already are being used in the community. And so the whole idea here is that we want to break down the ivory tower. We want to tear it down. We're not interested in consolidating ideas and making them inaccessible and unavailable to people and making them more expensive. Ideas, especially when they involve the survival of the human species, should not be expensive. And so these students didn't write papers that only I read and then we forget about them. They're doing work that is engaged with the community. So they deserve another round of applause. And we're going to take a quick break now. Let's take about 10 minutes. Can we take 10 minutes? And then we're going to meet back in here for the kind of closing wrap up. And I know it's been a long weekend, but we do want to close in a good way, come together and kind of bring together all the pieces, all the threads of everything that we've begun this weekend. Could we maybe shut that door, Joni? Thank you. We're all going to watch Leona edit this. Well, we've reached that moment where we are wrapping things up finally. That's where my mind space is. No, I'm really excited to be coming together with you all to kind of conclude this weekend, this symposium, which we very boldly used words like historic and timely and unique to describe this weekend. And I don't know, what do you all think? Did we live up to that? I think so. It's always a little scary to do something for the first time. And we as a group at the Nuclear Issues Study Group, we're a baby group. And yet within not even 2 years of being a group, we decided to do this as our first event. So I'm just so proud to be a part of something like this. And I really think it is important to give credit where credit is due. So I just real quickly want to bring up the group right now. Can you all come up and just quickly be embarrassed publicly? So Brendan, Cody. So, and I know you've heard about this a lot this weekend, but this group came together in a really kind of organic and amazing way. We've got students, we've got community members, we have queer folks and straight folks and two-spirit folks, we have people of color and white folks, and we've been really intentional about, again, foregrounding the ways that we are different, but how those differences are sources of strengths. And so it's amazing. Look at this group of people up here who put this on.
Okay, so so during this portion, we want to honor all of those who have done the work. We're going to do that in a minute, and I think just the simplest way to say that by inviting all of you here, and by all of you being here, students, activists, community members, we also honor your presence here and want to thank you for being with us all weekend, especially those who have traveled and all the years of work that are in this room. You know, if we added it all up, it's hundreds of years, and we represent hundreds of lives and generations. And so I'm also very happy to have this very powerful group of people up here. There should be 10 of us. There's 10 of us. There's 11. Okay. So we're all here, and and I just want to say something about each of these people who I've come to meet, some for the very first time, and some I've known for years. And so Joel, down at the end, sometimes can be quite soft-spoken, but I was just amazed by that very powerful, strong voice he had when he did his poetry the other night. That was just amazing. And Joel has brought some very good insight to the group, and I think his background and his experience, he's the one that keeps pushing us that we need to work on the weapons. And we will work on the weapons, Joel. So can we just honor Joel and give him a round of applause? And Peter Clark has done a lot of work on the Leonard Peltier issue and has come into our group, and so has always been a person to support the indigenous movement. And without Pete's help, we wouldn't have the access to some of the sources that we needed for our financial and online resources. And then internally, the same thing. He just came in kind of toward the end, but provided some much needed resources and support, but also is a personal friend of mine, and I just want to say thank you to Pete for all the work that you've done. And Sue Skirman, I don't know I can't say enough, because we only have a short amount of time, but some of these people have just been outstanding, and Sue is one of these people. She's the director of the Peace and Justice Center, which that alone speaks for itself, because the amount of work she has over there and the amount of hours she's put in with this group and the support that we get from the Peace and Justice Center has been very strong, because we have somebody who has helped us to learn how to utilize this center. Without her, I don't think we would have known what is available to us as a Pajola group. So we pay our annual membership and we utilize that place as much as possible. And it's because of Sue that we have a meeting space and access to, we know when the newsletter deadline is, we get all those things in there. And so besides that, she's just also another personal friend. I want to say thank you to Sue very much. And Cody, I can see him getting nervous over there. I really appreciate this young man. I had to really haggle him to get to the Chicago meeting last year, and I had to bug him, and he got special permission to turn in a final late or to do some kind of thing. And yeah, so I also thank his instructor for allowing him to do that, because without him going to the meeting and learning about CIS, I don't think we would have someone on the phone calls with the National Organizing Committee, and I think he just took amazing leaps forward in the short amount of time that I've known Cody. So let's all give Cody a big round of applause, and thank you. And so Denise was our taskmaster. So Denise kept us in line while we were organizing this thing. Denise helped also to do some of the research for the presentation I did the first day. And Denise, I know she likes to be behind the scenes, but what she does is very much at the forefront of what this group is all about. And I think her trip to Japan, her semester in Japan, and the growth that I have seen in this young woman over the short amount of time I've known her is immeasurable. And I just want to say, thank you so much. So when I talk about Brendan, I'm going to also have to mention our group. I think we have this unofficial mascot. So Brendan has come into he's joined our circle. Brendan is Eileen's brother, and he came in and he helps with whatever we need help with.
I have to say, though, he's much more than my brother. My poor brother often gets referred to as my brother. So.
Right. But he's his own person, as we all are. But I mean, he's helping with the meetings, he's helping with everything, just doing so much for our group. And also, he has the cutest little dog named Scruffy, who helps with maybe some of the, what do you call those? Like, he's kind of like a service dog, I think, for all of us. Emotional support, moral support. So to Brendan and Scruffy, thank you very much. And for Summer was one of the earliest members of the organization, and Summer has been there as one of the founding members, and I really just appreciate them and the story they shared today about being arrested and all of the work, the food support, getting the donations, and just being a part of our organization. Summer, you bring a lot to this group, and I want to say thank you. And some of these students came from Eileen's class, and we're just super impressed by some of the things these young people have done. And so Graham is one of those young people that has just went above and beyond. And I have some people out there commenting to me like, who is this guy? He's like, he told me, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. What do you need? Just let me know. And so I want to see more of that, Graham, because what you have done for this conference has been it's more than we could ask. And everything Graham has done, Graham is from the Grants Mineral Belt, and he also wants to continue the work on uranium mining. And so we're also going to connect that, but it's nice to have somebody from the impacted community. And so we're going to build, because just like Joel with the weapons, I know Graham wants to do some work on uranium mining. So we're going to do it. We're going to do that work together, Graham. And so let's all give Graham a warm thank you. Yeah. And so Tino, I've actually known for quite some time and came into this group early on, and for the conference has organized not one, but 2 events, maybe 3 events, because Tino did both of the evening art, the first art reception, and also the night last night. Tino organized all of that and organized all of the artists to come in. And Tino has been there in our group this whole time, keeping us in the conversation of things that Tino has been a part of, talking about Standing Rock and some of these other things, which sometimes we forget because we're so focused on the anti-nuke work. So I just want to say thank you for Tino, to all of your work on the art events and the art exhibit and being a part of the group. Thank you. And Eileen. I don't know what to say about Eileen. Sometimes she embarrasses me because she says things about me, but now I get my chance to get her back. I went on tour with Eileen and the In-Betweens last summer, and that was quite an experience, and I got to know this group. But the music that this woman produces, it just really touches my soul, and it makes me cry, because to hear the work that I'm not a musically inclined person, and so to know the talent that this woman has and how she utilizes it to make such beautiful art of such an ugly, ugly situation, I am so indebted to her, because not only is her art so special to me, we've been friends for a while, since 2013. We met in CARD, and we got to know each other, and we built this thing together. We've been collaborating about it for years before this group even existed. Every piece, every step, how we introduce ourselves at meetings, how we have decided that this vehicle of her class, the 2 sustainability studies classes, is the reason why some of us are here today. But also, we knew we had to design something that had to connect the students to the work. And at first, we tried to do this through the high school system, but we knew that wasn't as easy because of the core curriculum standards in the United States. And so she just blew me away by creating this class. And I know this class should be taught in every college. It should be a requirement in the core curriculum. So I want to say thank you to Eileen.
Okay, I have to continue embarrassing you then if I do that every time I introduce you. Well, I mean, I think we all know that Leona Morgan is the heart and soul of what happened this weekend. That is so clear. And I view her as a mentor in my own life, and I am indebted to her for basically teaching me how to fight the beast and how to dismantle it. And it's been an honor and a privilege to work alongside her and alongside all of these incredible humans to do this. And forgive us for taking this much time, to thank people, but I think this is really important because I want you to know how this works. I want you to know that this wasn't just like some magical thing that appeared and happened. It didn't, it took hard work, and we had to work through conflict, and we had to figure out the money, and we still have to figure out the money. And the food and everything, and it's just like it takes this to do this. It takes this many people, and and we're grateful that you all are here. And yesterday, Lindsay, who was here from Georgia, she stayed with me over the weekend, and we were up late, up till 1 a.m. last night talking about everything. And Leona asked her, she said, Lindsay, what would you like to see at the end of this conference? How do you think we should end it? And she said, I think you need to point out how this conference, how this symposium was filling a gap and filling a hole and a need in the anti-nuclear movement, however we want to frame the fight against nuclear colonialism. That's what we tried to do this weekend, and I really believe that we did that. So hopefully you can see what it took and what it's going to take to continue that.
So the other thing Lindsay said was, at the beginning we kind of laid it out. This is what we're going to do, and then and we did it. And so now here we are telling you all that all of us, we completed this journey together this weekend, and we are so happy. I think all of us are, I know we're all tired, but the amount of, the appreciation I think all of us have for all of you, you know, there's a lot of people missing right now that were here throughout the weekend, and we also acknowledge a lot of them, and I mean, work with them, you know, daily. But we also thank all of you for being here, and the fact that we got through it together. This is a huge success on our part as a group because, like I said, it's our first event. But we hope that we continue to do this work. We hope that all of us, one of our main things during this whole weekend was just to stay united. And I think in our work here, we've also become united with you all, and you all being here have hopefully become united with us. So I just want to say thank you to each and every one of you for being here. And so, yeah. And with that, we have a lot of other acknowledgements to make. And so I'm going to ask the study group if I left anyone out. Maybe you want to stay close. So I'm going to read the list of folks who helped us with this event. And so please remind me if there's anyone that's not on the list. So first and foremost, we want to thank the UNM Sustainability Studies Department program. I can't say department. Yes. So thank you to SUST. We want to thank La Placita Institute, who helped with the printing of our t-shirts. And of course, yeah, thank you. We want to thank Available Media. And of course, we want to thank our friend from Taos, Robin Collier. Robin Collier has been recording this. Available Media has been providing the AV and the live stream, which will be recorded, and Robin Collier has been recording all the audio, which will be aired eventually on the FM radio station 90.1 FM. Cultural Energy. Okay. Oh, great. Culturalenergy.org. Okay, that's good for us to know. We will embed it. And of course, somebody who has helped some of us personally, and also where I mentioned CARD, I met Eileen there. We want to thank Janet Greenwald, not just for cooking, but for all the support you've given us. Thank you, Janet. And then to the security guards who don't know it yet, but they might be staying a little bit late today. Ryan Swallow and Kenneth J. Lucero. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I'm going to let Eileen read some of these.
We also want to thank Sabankar Banerjee, Dr. Banerjee from the UNM Art History Department. They generously donated $500 to us, so we're really grateful to them.
And for keeping us going with caffeine, Oliver Baker, who has provided the coffee for us, but not 1, but 2 days. And also for Georgia Wan, who Lindsay had to leave early this morning, but Georgia Wan sent one of their staff members over. They had been over, they were over, their community people did not have the capacity to come, so they generously let us take one of their staff members for 3 days. And so Lindsay Harper, we would like to thank you, wherever you are, in the air.
And then lastly, we want to thank our friend Cal. Not last, sorry. We also want to thank our friend Cal, who provided generously healing arts massage for so many people. As you are all digesting this heavy information, it's important to integrate the healing arts. So thank you so much, Cal. And they donated the proceeds to us.
And to all the presenters who provided their own travel, I'd really like to thank, I think the first one that jumped up and was like, yes, we're going to be there, was Karen Haddon. And Lon Burnham, I know he didn't speak. And of course, Kevin Camps. And Kevin is from Beyond Nuclear. He came in from DC, and so did Diane Dorigo. Yep. Thank you so much. And I'm looking in the audience because I know, okay, there you are. And so there's some other folks who aren't here that also helped with the event. And so if we left anyone out, we'll have a list of acknowledgements on our website. Anyone? Oh, right. Okay. Who? Okay, Rob from Satellite for the coffee? No? So Clee Benali, Tina Cashel for the art design, the people who donated at the table. We got some online donations. Dave Kraft from NEIS. One of a guy who started a Dene info shop, Brandon Benali. He came in for a minute and he left. Yep. The Sierra Club Nuclear Free Campaign. Oh, okay. Yeah, so thank you to that. I'm also part of the front end working group. I should have asked them for some funding for my travel. I'm just kidding. And the Peace Center decided to donate $100. So we got quite a few donations, and we're still taking them, so please feel free to keep giving. And I think we're going to move on now. We also would like to honor some of the people who have been doing the work for before our time. And so I'm going to ask Kevin and Diane to come up and help to tell us a little bit, educate us a little bit about some of our elders in the movement who have passed and the work that they have contributed. And so Kevin has worked with Native people and has extensive experience in doing some of this work. And I know Diane also works with some Indigenous people up in the northern New York. And I just want to say thank you to both of them for being here. And then also, they are my mentors, and they're people who have helped me in the movement. And so, yeah, and please share with us the pictures that we're about to show.
So, yeah.
I didn't know how many Fs.
So,
she's got one.
Should I, Rufina?
Yeah.
So Rufina Marie Laws, back in 1994,
Actually, let me just start it and you tell about her, because the first three are MRS, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, the dump that we're fighting now, the dumps at Waste Control Specialists and at Holtec in Lee Eddy County, New Mexico, there's an acronym CIS, Centralized Interim Storage. We call them parking lot dumps because it would bring the waste from around the country to a parking lot in your community, in your state. And this is not the first time that we've been threatened with these parking lot dumps. Back in the late 70s, there was an effort for AFR, away from reactor storage. They changed the name in the 1980s and called it monitored retrievable storage. And the first three or so people here, we worked with intensively to fight the threat mainly to tribal lands. And I'll let you, Kevin, talk about the specifics of some of these folks, but I wanted to put it in the context of this is a continuing fight, and these folks fended it off the last round, and it's up to us to do it this round.
So this photo was taken in 1994 at Prairie Island Nuclear Power Plant in Minnesota, which is the Medewa-Kantan Dakota Tribes Reservation. It's an island in the Mississippi River. And the reason that Rufina Marie Laws was there, she was on a national speaking tour against centralized interim storage at Mescalero Apache in New Mexico of high-level radioactive waste. And this company, Northern States Power, it's now called Excel, was one of the worst in that regard. They were trying to get their waste from native land, where it was generated against the tribe's will, out to native land without consent, against the will of people like Rufina Marie Laws. And I was a baby activist. I was only 2 years in at the time. And I got to see her here in Minnesota, and I got to see her in Southeast Michigan. And in both locations, this was a very powerful event, 800 people. There was a canoe flotilla down from the Twin Cities. A lot of Native folks involved, especially Prairie Island, tribal members and residents. And one of the beautiful things I'd never even heard of before was they wove a web of life with colored yarn on the front entrance of Prairie Island Nuclear Power Plant. And they did the same thing in Monroe, Michigan, and she's a very powerful speaker. And Monroe, Michigan is the Fermi Nuclear Power Plant. It's also the hometown of George Armstrong Custer. And there's this larger-than-life monument to Custer celebrating the Battle of Washita, which was a massacre of old people and children, a sleeping village. And the Web of Life was also spun there. So those were very powerful events that really deepened the hook in me to do this fight. And they stopped the dump at Mescalero. So huge victory. Rufina Marie Laws, Joe Geronimo. they were made to suffer for their activism. She received death threats. So,
who's in charge of the video? If you could jump ahead to Joe Campbell, because this goes together. Skip. Okay, right here. Okay, Kevin. Talk about Joe.
Check. Just say we honor you about each one of these people, because basically they're with us. They're here. So about Rufina, we honor you.
Do you want me to do Joe?
Yeah, because it's the same thing you're
And
talking
certainly
about. He's
fill in.
Prairie Island.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories about Joe Campbell at Prairie Island was, so the Department of Energy had this nuclear waste negotiator, and he would go around the country and try to convince, especially Native American reservations, that they really wanted to host these centralized interim storage sites for high-level radioactive waste. And there was money offered, so that enticed some tribal councils. What they did at Prairie Island was very clever. They took the money. Thank you very much. They kept taking the money. They kept going deeper and deeper into the process. And what they were doing with the money, under Joe's leadership and non-Native allies in the area too, was showing how bad a site Prairie Island was, not only for monitored retrievable storage, but for the presence of 2 reactors, on-site storage of radioactive waste. So they really pulled a coup against the Department of Energy.
And now go to Grace Thorpe. She's in this. Oh, okay. Grace Thorpe. So in the 1987 Nuclear Waste Policy Amendments Act, the one they're trying to change now, that one said you could have centralized storage, but you had to find a volunteer for it by 1990. So 1990 came and went, and nobody volunteered, and so at this point it is illegal under our federal laws to have a centralized, supposedly interim storage site. And even back then, when they were trying to push for it, it was supposed to be linked to it. Couldn't open until there was a permanent place already there, so that it would have a less likely chance of de facto being permanent. So Grace, and what Kevin said, they had the nuclear waste negotiator as part of the legislation to entice tribes mainly, but anybody else who would volunteer. And Grace joined forces, her Sac and Fox tribe in Oklahoma. They rejected the idea of having nuclear waste, and she went around with this information and got many nations, Native nations, declared nuclear-free zones. It was a whole nuclear-free campaign, and she was a major part of that. She joined our board at Nuclear Information Resource Service for many years, and she's one of our heroines. Did you want to say anything about Grace?
Yeah, she's also Pokagon Potawatomi, which is where I'm from in Michigan, and just like Eileen and her brother are individual people. Another claim to fame of Grace Thorpe is that her father is Jim Thorpe, athlete of the century. So she not only restored his Olympic medals to him, but she also stopped really 60 of these centralized interim storage sites targeted at Indian reservations across the country. Those were tribal councils that wanted the money, were interested, and she set the example at Sac and Fox in Oklahoma. She called a special election after the tribal council said yes to the DOE money and got the tribal council replaced like 3 days later.
We honor you. Okay, before we do Corbin, let's go back to Margene Bull Creek. And Kevin worked day and night with Margene Bull Creek, the Go Shoots.
Well, after the nuclear waste negotiator ceased to exist, and I should say that at one point his name was David Leroy, and he gave this really awful, infamous speech out west, I think in San Francisco, I don't remember, pointing out that Native Americans are such good stewards of the land and so close to the earth that they're the perfect people to host these nuclear waste dumps. Who better, you know? So after the nuclear waste negotiator position was terminated, and Grace Thorpe and Nears, Mary Olson, Diane DeRigo helped make that happen. Well, the nuclear power industry then took the reins on this idea and went forward, first with Mescalero Apache, and Rufina Marie laws stopped that dump against all odds. And then the next target was Skull Valley Goshoots in Utah. And when I joined NEARS in 1999, Skull Valley was really heating up. And Margene was the leader of the traditionals at Skull Valley, a very tiny community, 125 members. And just like at Mescalero Apache, the opponents like Margene, Bull Creek, and Sammy Black Bear were really made to suffer. There were attempts by the tribal chairman to terminate their tribal membership. He also cut off their federal monies that he was supposed to pass on to them, so they were not getting their income for a number of years. And Sammy Black Bear, somebody took a shot at him across the desert. He didn't know if it was a warning shot or if the person just missed. So they were made to suffer, and they stood strong. And even though the Nuclear Racism Commission rubber stamped this license application, we still stopped it working together. And Margene and Sammy were the leaders of that effort.
And with the new legislation, there's a possibility, if you look at the language of the bill, the HR 3053 that we must all fight to stop, it actually could, because part of why this dump that got licensed in Skull Valley didn't proceed is that the utilities have to keep liability for the waste. So this bill would shift the liability to the U.S. taxpayers even before it goes to a permanent dump, and thus it is a potential threat that the Utah site could be reactivated, and it is licensed. Okay, go to Margene.
We honor you.
Corbin, he's all yours.
Well, I owe a lot to Corbin personally. My first involvement in anti-nuke was in 1992 on the Walk Across America for Mother Earth, which was a collaboration between the Western Shoshone Indians, and Corbin was the spiritual leader of the Western Shoshone, and a Belgian organization called For Mother Earth. Another Shoshone elder, Bill Rossi Sr., came up with that name, and the Belgians loved it. And so we walked from New York City to Nevada, to 3,500 miles over 9.5 months to end nuclear weapons testing. And it was the 500th anniversary of Columbus, too. So pretty powerful introduction to all this stuff for me. And Corbin was waiting for us at the test site, and it was called Healing Global Wounds. It was Indigenous Peoples Day, 1992. And after that, the Shundahai Network, which Corbin led, was formed in Nevada. And they just did amazing work. I mean, one time they shut down the highway and the front entrance to the Nevada test site. For a long period of time, there was a big old traffic jam out there. And one of the proteges who came out of that, I'd like to honor too, Susie Snyder, was a big part of the Shundahai Network from a very young age. And then she went on to work for some organizations in Europe, like ICANN, which is about to get a Nobel Peace Prize in a few days. So Corbin inspired vast numbers of people over decades, fighting nuclear weapons testing, fighting the Yucca Mountain dump, just a force of nature. And yeah, so we owe a lot to him.
Corbin Harney, we honor you.
I don't know if we've got any more pictures on here, do we?
No, but I have a few more names if you guys want to add to the list. And so I'll say the name, and then you guys can repeat what we were saying. So Dorothy Purley is a Native woman from New Mexico, and she had done a lot of work. And so I'm not going to go into detail about these folks, but I'm just going to name and then ask all of you to repeat. So Dorothy Purley. Mary Dan. Karen Silkwood. Silko?
Silkwood.
Karen Silkwood. I wrote it right. Michael Marriott. We honor you.
I have from the Ward Valley fight, Steve Lopez, who's with the thank you, Fort Mojave, and Claudette White, who is down with Kokopah. Kuchan. Oh God, there's 5 wonderful nations, and those are the two of the many people. Llewellyn from Fort Mojave. So all of the fighters at Ward Valley.
All of the fighters of Ward Valley, we honor you. All of the uranium workers and millers,
we honor you.
all of the downwinders, and to all our relatives. Right. So thank you for helping us with this portion, and we have a few more things to do. So. Okay, so there's a video on there. If you could escape the PowerPoint, and while Denise is queuing this up, so you go to the video, and then don't play it yet, but okay, get rid of that thing. Push Command F. Get it full screen. You got it? It's by the space bar. It's the Apple. Remember I kept saying Apple? Okay, so this is a video. Okay, before you play it, you're going to stop it at 7 minutes and 14 seconds, okay? All right. Sorry, we got Graham was going to do this, so anyways. So part of the work, we might have did this a little bit backwards. We wanted to honor our elders. We wanted to honor you all in the room, and of course we want to honor our organizers, but we're also going to be taking steps forward. So during this time, we're going to transition into the closing of our event, which this is all part of the closing, but some of the things we talked about moving forward is collaboration. We talked about this walkabout. I talked about doing some international work, and so these folks from Australia, they want to come to New Mexico, and they're dealing with uranium mining there. And so this also goes into our Hall of Victories, because in this video, we're going to see an Aboriginal woman who's dealing with uranium mining, and they're also dealing with nuclear waste dumps in Australia. And so when they come to New Mexico, as an international group, they're going to come here and help us to do some statewide regional work when we do this walkabout. So I just wanted to introduce the two people in the video are from Australia, and Marcus Atkinson is the one that I had been communicating with. He works with the First Nations, the Aboriginal people in Australia. So go ahead, play the video.
Hi, my name is Vicky. I'm one of the native title holders, 12 native title holders for Uluru. Just giving you a bit of a background of where I'm from. Uluru is a place Chemico wants to do uranium mining, but over 40 years my my ancestors, all us TOs fought to stop this uranium going ahead. Yeah, so last week we took Chemico to court. Yeah, so me and my two aunties, we stood there, listened, went into the courthouse, listened. At the hearing, it was a long day for us, but hopefully in a few weeks or in end of the year or early in the year, we'll hear our answer.
And why did you take Cameco and the state to court, Vicky?
From the beginning. Is it at the beginning? So, oh, okay. I'm sorry to interrupt. Okay, because it did go all the way, move it back all the way to the beginning, and then restart it. I'm so sorry, guys.
Hi, my name is Vicky. I'm one of the native title holders, 12 native title holders for Uluru. Just giving you a bit of a background of where I'm from. Uluru is a place Chemico wants to do uranium mining, but over 40 years, my families,
okay, so
my ancestors.
I'm sorry, guys. I'm really sorry about that. This video, do you remember where we stopped it? Can you just restart it from there? Basically, these folks, they were battling Chemico, and they're talking about going out in country, and I wanted to point out the significance between the indigenous people over there and their sacred places and here. And so they had to deal with this big corporation, and we want to welcome them and invite them, and I want to invite everyone here to work with us when we organize to meet with them in 2020. So Marcus is about to tell us, he's going to give us a message. We can just cut it there because we're running into time, so if you want to close it out and go back to the PowerPoint. I'm really sorry, guys. I think it's been a long day for me. But yeah, so Marcus goes on to say how they've had several victories and they've been holding the companies back for 8 years and it's been a huge victory, but they're planning to come out in 2019 to do a planning meeting with us. So our group here, they're giving a message of solidarity so they're going to come out in 2019 to visit, do a site visit, and then we're going to plan for our big walk that we want everyone to be a part of in 2020. Okay, so moving on. Sorry, that was a very odd transition. Okay, so we got a couple more of these, and then we're going to close out. So Eileen and I have been working on putting this together, and one of the things that we didn't do yesterday during the event in Chicago, I mentioned that there was this message we had from Dec.3. They were listening to a lot of the work by Arnie Gunderson, who switched sides and came to be an activist after working for the nuclear industry. And his work, he did a lot of stuff with Fukushima, and he's an internationally known person, very well respected. Well, let me just read his statement. Okay. So this is a message from Arnie Gunderson. In solidarity, dear Leona and members of the Nuclear Issues Study Group, it is a sad day in history. I am in Chicago, where they will soon commemorate the first controlled fission of uranium in a squash court under Soldiers Field at the onset of World War II. It is appropriate to consider the human and environmental legacy that was created by that event. 1, the instantaneous destruction of 250,000 people at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and further premature deaths and deformities that continue to this day. 2, the destruction of indigenous lands throughout the world in search of a yellow metal called uranium. Thousands of locations are nameless, but Church Rock remains one of the most blatant abuses of Mother Earth in the planet's history. 3, unanalyzed and undocumented health conditions, including premature deaths and deformities near mining sites, dump sites, weapon detonation sites, and nuclear reactor sites throughout the world, falling disproportionately on communities of color and in economic hardship. 4, the invention of depleted uranium weapons used in conventional warfare throughout the world. Nuclear disasters at Fukushima. 5, nuclear disasters at Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Santa Susana, Windscale, Mayak, and more. 6, and the potential for a nuclear weapons apocalypse at some point in the not-too-distant future. I join in solidarity with you as we all attempt to end this destructive era, each in our own unique way. Good luck to all of us. Arnie Gunderson, Chief Engineer, Fairwinds Energy Education. So that was a message he sent us.
All right, we have one more message of solidarity from my mentor and teacher in this work as well, someone who I love very much, who is almost 90 years old, who's been doing this work for a very long time. Some of you may know her work. She's an eco-philosopher and a Buddhist scholar, Joanna Macy. So she was unable to be with us, but she sent us this message. It's an audio message.
Hello, all you dismantlers in nuclear issues. This is Joanna Macy, and I have been wishing that I was there in Albuquerque with you this weekend. I haven't heard your words, I haven't seen your faces, but I've been looking at you, and I feel a deep kinship with you. I feel I know you in a way. After so many decades of my life, coming to terms to ourselves with nuclear power and nuclear energy, I feel that I know your courage to face what are government and our military efforts and non-disrespectful over the time of the public. I feel I know your human mind. To grasp the future of life on Earth depends on our time.
So I want you to feel, even though we're thinning out as a crowd, it's been a long weekend. I want you to feel, I want to echo what Joanna just said, that there's so many people with us that are here right now, even on the internet. Hey, internet. We're live streaming. But really, that's true, that there are just so many folks whose shoulders we stand on in doing this work. And also, I really do believe that the future ones, the ones who are coming, who are just around the bend, I think of them often. They're here, they're with us, and they're grateful for this work that we are doing.
Okay, so with that, I just want to say thank you to all of our video representatives, and then also thank you to those who have provided the prayers for us this weekend. First, we had Verna Teller from the Pueblo of Isleta, and yesterday morning we had a prayer from Kathy Sanchez, and then this morning we had a meditation from the People of Color Yoga group who came in and helped us to learn how to let go of some of this heavy stuff. And then this evening, I'd like to say thank you to Mr. Petuch Gilbert of the Pueblo of Acoma, who will be leading us in our closing prayer in the lobby. So can we all, okay, so one thing.
Just want to say that this water has been with us all weekend, and it's been our witness. And we have been, the water has heard everything that has been said here, and it has been our reminder and sort of our grounding point at, again, why we're doing this work and who we are doing it for. So, and it's been absorbing all of the prayers and the laughter and the good wishes and the snarky remarks and all of those things. I didn't mean to look at you. All right, so we're going to take this water out with us as we close this beautiful weekend and move forward.
And please take your belongings. We're going to start cleaning up. So as we go to the lobby, grab what you can, and then we'll see you in the lobby. We'll form a circle out there. And I think this is where we end the live stream. So to everybody out there in the world, we thank you for joining us. We honor your work. We honor you too. And